Ieuan Deulwyn. Ieuan Deulwyn FL c. 1460 was a Welsh language poet or bard. Poetry, a collection of 50 of the poems of Ieuan Deulwyn, were published in 1909 under the auspices of the Bangor Welsh Manuscripts Society thanks to Ieuan Williams. Ieuan Deulwyn belonged to the school of Dafydd ap Gwilym, as did Bido Bjarwenlys, Dafydd ap Edmund and others. Because they have similar styles, their work is constantly attributed to each other, which makes definitive identification of Ieuan's poetry difficult. Williams used the evidence of multiple manuscripts as a determination of which poems to include in his collection, which may have resulted in some of Deulwyn's poems being excluded. But we are fortunate indeed in the edition that was published, complete with explanatory footnotes, notes about many of the subjects, and indexes of both people and places. Ieuan clings to 1 meter. The Cywyd. There are several types of Cywyd, each with strictly defined rules that were well established by Ieuan's time. In the less rigid forms of poetry to which we are accustomed in English, strict rules might seem to result in a staid or dry poetry. But, as Glanmer Williams says, far from being fetters which intolerably shackle the poet's ability to express himself freely, the rules of Singhained and Cywyd become adornments which add to the power as well as the elegance of the verse. No wonder it took at least 9 years to become a master poet. Of course, these rules developed around the Welsh language, complicating translation of the poetry into English. One poem that has been translated into English is an elegy for Dafydd Fichin ap Dafydd of Lynwent, Ambister, Radnorshire, and his friend Ieuan ap Gruffod ap Hywel Elelwyd of Closhveen, Angurig, Montgomeryshire. The friends were slain in an ambush during the reign of Henry VI. Ieuan's best work is considered to be in his love poems, which comprise the majority of his collected works, 22 of 50 poems. Williams says that he is above all a poet of love, and George Borrow opines that Ieuan Deulwyn's most beautiful production is his Cywyd to a birch tree. Borrow suggests this might have some relation to the Deulwyn part of his name, but the word for birch, bedwyn, can also mean a symbol of constancy in love. For Ieuan, this quality apparently superseded marriage, as one of his poems, To a Cuckold, implies. This poem is also described as a poem to his love who had alienated him after marrying a wealthy churl. The expectation that a married woman would remain faithful to her former lover might reveal something about the society in which he lived, or perhaps the character of the poet. After all, his teacher was Dafydd ap Gwilym. Deulwyn's poems have the usual romantic references, but his melancholy laments are even better. As Professor Williams observes, Deulwyn complains about the waiting, the longing, and his aching, like every lover. He knows well how to turn a sweet verse, but understanding the puzzling personality of Gwen is too much for him. Like his skilled teacher, he jokes about the deplorable condition to which he was driven by love, even to the loss of his hair. Deulwyn sometimes borders on what might be considered blasphemy in other ages. In praise of the generosity of Ieuan ap Dafydd of Lysnewid, he says in his elegy, "If he is in his Sion's home, God will not be without a drink of wine. Do not be so treacherous," writes a later copyist in the margin, but Deulwyn says his treatment of his guests made a saint of Sion's soul. In his elegy to Sir Richard Herbert, Ieuan compares the sorrow at the news of his death to the crucifixion of Christ, and the betrayal at Banbury as exceeded only by the betrayal of God. Similarly, in his elegy to Dafydd Fichin and Ieuan ap Griffith, as Mary mourned beneath the cross her son's fell wounds, so I their loss. His poems of praise are loaded with genealogy until they bore the poet, but they are a treat for the historian and genealogist. The subjects of these poems are generally the heroes of the Wars of the Roses. He was a contemporary of Lewis Glyn Cothai, and they frequently wrote of the same people, with the benefit that one poet often supplements the other in clarifying relations of local families. Although Ieuan, like Lewis, was able to flatter his patrons, he was unfortunate enough to anger two who were worthy of reconciliation. And indeed he humbles himself in seeking that reconciliation. At the same time, this presents a perfect opportunity for him to paint a picture of the slanderer. Fortunately, the poet was successful enough in his work to have his poetry survive the ravages of time. Origins. Ieuan was from Pendeulwyn in Angenor parish in the Welshry of Sidweli Kidweli Comote in Carmarthenshire. A Roman 8 Roman 9, from this place he took his pen name. While Ieuan Deulwyn has become the standardized version of the poet's name, his name appears in the copies of his poetry in various forms, including Ieuan Deulwyn, Ieuan Deulwyn, and Evan o Deulwyn. In pedigrees his name appears as Evan Deulwyn Thelder, Dwyland Els, to Bush and Dwyland to Bush, 152-153, the latter designations derived from the English translation of Deulwyn, i.e. to bush, to bush, to bush, to bush, to bush, to bush. It is emphasized in the pedigrees because at least one of Ieuan's sons adopted the surname Bush on establishing himself in England, and it was this branch of the family that sought out the heralds to establish the pedigree. Ancestors. In the 16th century, John Bush of Dilton, Wiltshire, came to the Clarencieux king of arms, probably William Harvey, and required of him to search his records to identify how he John was descended of Dwyland to Bush. The Clarencieux discovered that John Bush was the son and heir of John Bush, on Bush, the son and heir of William Bush and his wife, a daughter of Strange of Gloucester, which William Bush was son and heir to Dwyland to Bush of the county of Carmarthen, who married Cecily, daughter of Thos, Ride Thomas Reade of Rhodes Court by Talcarn in the county of Carmarthen. That Dwyland to Bush is Ieuan Deulwyn is made clear by another manuscript that equates the Bush and Deulwyn pedigrees. This pedigree identifies Ieuan as Evan Deulwyn Thelder, son of David Deulwyn, son of John, son of Griffith, son of Meredith, son of Gruffith, son of Cadgan Fitchin, son of Cadgan Fowler. This Cadgan Fowler was born about AD 1200 and had the house of Meaner Cadgan, one of the comotes in the Welshry of the lordship of Kidweli in medieval times. Ieuan's ancestry can be traced even further back, since Cadgan Fowler was a descendant of the tribal patriarch Llewellyn ap Gwr Gan, whose paternal line traces back to the 6th century Pleashen, king of Dyfed. Descendants. Ieuan Deulwyn and his wife Cecily Reade had at least 4 children: Ieuan John the Younger, William, Thomas, and Elaine. Ieuan the Younger. Ieuan the Younger might be John Bush, a 15th century wool merchant in Northleach, Gloucestershire. His merchant's mark contains a clear to be designation, and his descendants are associated with some of the same families as William's descendants. William Bush, 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 William Bush. William's line is the one identified in the pedigrees. His descendants include such notable figures as Paul Bush, first Protestant, Bishop of Bristol, Charles Kendall Bush, Lord Chief Justice of the King's Bench for Ireland, Admiral Sir John Bush Royal, Navy officer, and the current monarch of Great Britain. That the name is Elizabeth is clarified by Gervase Bush in his entry at June Ferguson's Royal Genealogy page. Elaine Furch Ieuan Deulwyn. Elaine married Hywel ap Myrddod of Cromlech, and Fetchel, Anglesey, and a fairly extensive list of at least one line of her descendants is documented. Thomas ap Ieuan Deulwyn and others. Thomas ap John Deulwyn appears as a witness to a 1490 deed in Brecon, although no more is known of him. Other descendants of Ieuan Deulwyn remained in Carmarthenshire, as evidenced by a 1609 survey of freeholders in the Welshry of Kidweli. Life. Given the dates of his poetry and the dates of birth of his children, it is most likely he was born at some date between 1425 and 1435 and died around 1490, but no exact dates are recorded. Ieuan Deulwyn is 7 generations removed from Cadgan Fowler, who was born about 1200. He had grandchildren born in the 1480s and possibly some as early as the 1450s, which puts Ieuan's birth in the early part of the 15th century. As a descendant of Cadgan Fawr, Ieuan was a distant cousin to his neighbour Griffith de Deulwyn, with whom he may have served in the French wars in the first half of the 15th century. Howell Evans attributes poetry written to the Welsh hero Matthew Go to Ieuan Deulwyn. No such poem appears in William's collection, but if Ieuan did write a poem during the lifetime of Matthew Go, it would date his earliest poetry prior to 1450. Ieuan Deulwyn's name appears in a 1460 commission attributed to Edward Roman IV to look into the lineage of the Herberts, in which the poet is said to be one of the four chiefest men of skill within the province of South Wales, presumably in regard to genealogy. However, Sir Samuel Meyrick demonstrates that the commission is spurious. Professor Ifor Williams suggests his poetry dates between about 1466 and 1488, with the latter date being questionable. He is said to have presided at the Glamorgan Gorsedd in 1480, although that is also questioned. In any case, Ieuan is generally believed to have died no later than 1500. He lived and wrote then, during the Wars of the Roses. He is styled a fervent supporter to the men of York by his editor, Ifor Williams, but a closer look at the subjects of his poems reveals that his devotion is more to family and country than to a political faction. He criticized Biddo Bjarwinleys for playing it both ways with regards to the political factions, yet Ieuan himself composed poetry for both Lancastrians and Yorkists, as can be seen graphically in the accompanying figure. The boxes identify subjects of Ieuan's poetry. The red roses identify people who supported the House of Lancaster Tudors, and the white roses identify people who supported the House of York Herberts. As Evans writes, referring to the bards of the 15th century, they sing the glory of a Tudor or a Herbert according as each rises to eminence and bids fair to become a national leader. Nor can it be said that they exposed themselves to a charge of apostasy if their panegyrics thus alternated between the one and the other. They were consistent in their nationalism. This nationalism took the form of opposition to the English, or the Saxon, as the Welsh referred to them. Indicative is his appeal to Sir Richard Herbert to lock the door of privilege against the Saxon. In his poem, I Ferche Gwalt to a Woman and Her Hair, Ieuan suggests half-jokingly that his love should not love him more than a deceitful Englishman. And in his elegy to Sir Richard Herbert, Ieuan refers to the English as the children of Alice, which the Reverend Ellie's notes means the children of hell. Sir Richard Herbert of Coldbrook, near Abergavenny, was Ieuan's principal patron, but he was in the homes of many of the most influential figures in South Wales. Although not of the stature of his cousins, the DWNNS Ieuan Deulwyn was not a poor man. The 1609 Freeholders' Survey in Kidwelly confirms that he had property that passed through several generations. His son William was a gentleman and his daughter Elaine married well. In marrying Cecily Reday, Ieuan himself married a woman of one of the most notable of Burgle families. In I Ferch Gwalt, Ieuan praises the girl I am going to ask for myself as a gift, which may refer to Cecily. He alludes to the stature of her family. He expresses some reservations, but then he exclaims, Cecily Reday certainly did come from a notable family. Her father was Thomas Reday, a merchant who was connected with some of the most influential families in South Wales, and her mother, or at least stepmother, was Elaine, daughter of the powerful Gruffydd ap Nicholas. Ieuan's death is undocumented. There is some evidence he wrote a poem as late as 1488, but that date is questioned. He is named with Dafydd Nanmer in an elegy of Dafydd eb Edmund by Tudur Aeld as if the three died at about the same time, which is believed to be about 1490. Yet, among his collected works there is no poem about the decisive Battle of Bosworth, which took place in 1485. His wife's cousin, Sir Rhys ap Thomas, played an important role in the battle, which led to him being knighted on the field. Ieuan knew Rhys ap Thomas well, and sang his praises, but there is no mention of his exploits at Bosworth. It is possible Ieuan was dead before the battle took place. References